President Trump has ignited a new war with Rosie O'Donnell. He says he's thinking of revoking her U.S. citizenship. Rosie O'Donnell is not in the best interest of our great country. I am giving serious consideration to taking away her citizenship. O'Donnell moved to Ireland after Trump's 2024 election. Today, she's firing back. He dug in even deeper at Andrews Air Force Base Sunday.
I don't know about Rosie. I watch Rosie. Rosie's a mess. She's a mess. But she left our country, which is a good thing, not a bad thing.
Trump has always hated the fact that I see him for who he is, a criminal con man, sexual abusing liar, out to harm our nation to serve himself. This is why I moved to Ireland.
Imagine being so furious you'd consider revoking someone's citizenship. That's exactly what Trump contemplated after Rosie O'Donnell's live TV takedown. But her bombshell isn't even the half of it. A massive rift in the MAGA movement, Epstein files shaking the administration, and a betrayal by one of Trump's own allies sent Donnie Diapers into a full-blown tantrum. What pushed him over the edge this time? And what does it mean for his power? Before we move on, I will like you to subscribe to the channel and like the video. What happens when an unstoppable force like Rosie O'Donnell collides with the immovable object that is Donald Trump's fragile ego? Well, in 2007, America got its answer, and it wasn't exactly subtle. Rosie, in her usual bold fashion, stood on live television and torched the carefully constructed facade of Trump's legendary success.
One of the things people love about you is you speak your mind and you don't use a politician's filter. However, that is not without its downsides, in particular when it comes to women.
And Celebrity Apprentice was not true. And Mark Burnett has tapes of him calling people every racist word in the world, telling women to get down on their knees.
You've called women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals. Your Twitter account...
Only Rosie O'Donnell.
She poked at his reputation as a businessman, mocked his decisions, and didn't hold back from declaring the emperor had no clothes. Metaphorically, of course. For Trump, who thrives on admiration like most people need oxygen, this wasn't a jab, it was a public mugging. Trump's reaction? Let's just say subtlety isn't in his playbook. What started as a few personal insults quickly escalated into a nationwide spectacle, steaming with the intensity of a reality TV reunion, but 10 times pettier. He didn't just clap back at Rosie. He launched a full-scale verbal assault, calling her names you'd usually hear in a middle school lunchroom spat. Terms like loser and fat pig were tossed around with the kind of venom that would make even Regina George from Mean Girls ask him to dial it down a notch. It wasn't just criticism though. Trump turned her into a symbol, a caricature of everything and everyone who dared to oppose him. But here's where things go from juvenile to downright bizarre.
And I've known Hillary for a long time. This is the first time ever that Hillary is sitting down and speaking to major corporate leaders and not getting paid for it. I don't think so badly of Rosie O'Donnell anymore. In fact, I'm actually starting to like Rosie a lot. I called Hillary a nasty woman. But this stuff is all relative. After listening to Hillary rattle on and on and on.
Trump's behavior during this feud was like a toddler throwing a fit over spilled milk, except this toddler had a national platform and access to every news outlet in the country. One minute he was on TV practically frothing at the mouth, and the next he was penning statements longer than a CVS receipt, all dedicated to tearing Rosie apart. Imagine someone losing a board game, flipping the table, and then writing a 3-page essay on why the rules are rigged. That was essentially Trump's vibe. Now Rosie didn't stay silent either, and her attacks got even sharper. But where Trump relied on cheap insults, she went for the jugular in a way that actually stung. Rosie didn't just call Trump names, she dissected his behavior. She painted him not as a powerful mogul, but as someone deeply insecure, desperate for validation, and unnervingly unstable. And to back it up, she wasn't just pulling opinions out of thin air. Rosie referenced The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, a compilation written by mental health professionals warning about about the psychological risks of a man like Trump being in power. This wasn't just shade, it was a full-on diagnostic roast. And let's not forget, this feud didn't vanish after the headlines moved on. It lingered and resurfaced in the oddest ways over the years. Trump was like a dog with a bone when it came to Rosie. He couldn't let it go.
I know he can't do that, but the Supreme Court has given him unbridled powers, and who knows what he can and can't do.
There he is, hair looping, going, everyone deserves a second chance, and I'm gonna give her a second chance.
O'Donnell also went on radio in Ireland addressing his threat to yank her citizenship, even though she was born in the USA. The Trump-O'Donnell feud goes back nearly 2 decades, ever since she mocked the future president's hair on The View.
In later interviews on Twitter, and even on the campaign trail, her name would still creep out of his mouth like she was living rent-free in his head. And maybe she was. Rosie, in calling Trump out publicly, struck a nerve he couldn't dull. It chipped away at his ego, exposing an alarming truth. He simply couldn't handle criticism without trying to destroy the person delivering it. If anything, this clash wasn't just some celebrity beef caught on camera. It was a blueprint for how Trump would react to opposition for years to come. From political rivals to investigative journalists, anyone who criticized him would be met with the kind of scorched earth nastiness that became his trademark. Rosie wasn't just a person to him. She became the embodiment of disrespect, and his obsession with retaliating against her revealed just how thin-skinned he was, even as he built his reputation on the illusion of toughness. But there's one more wrinkle to this story. What started as a spat launched on daytime TV didn't stay confined to entertainment. As Trump's tantrums moved into politics, the echoes of his feud with Rosie grew louder. Words like unstable and vindictive, once said in jest on a talk show, started taking on a whole new weight when tied to a president with actual power. The seeds of his unpredictability were planted years before, and Rosie was holding the watering can.
He is a cruel, criminal, and mentally unstable man. I expect nothing but the lowest bar for Donald Trump, and every single day he just grants my perception of him as correct by his actions, by his word, and I think he's the worst thing that ever happened to the United States, and his cruelty knows no bounds.
And yet, here's the real twist. This feud might have set the stage, but it was far from the finale. Trump's inability to manage his critics didn't just create public spectacles, it created risks, especially when his own allies began losing faith. And as we'll see, it wasn't always his enemies who did the most damage. Sometimes the real blows came from inside his own circle. What's worse than your enemies exposing you? Try watching your own friends take a torch to the illusion of loyalty you've built up. That's the mess Trump found himself in when the Epstein Files controversy blew a crater into the center of his administration. In the world of MAGA loyalty, it was a landmine that everyone saw coming, but no one dared to step around. When those sealed records cracked open, they didn't just threaten to expose ties to Epstein, they exposed how fragile Trump's so-called empire really was. The administration's cracks widened with the clash between Pam Bondi, Trump's ever-loyal attorney general, and Dan Bonino, the FBI deputy director, who, quite frankly, saw which way the wind was blowing. Bondi, known for standing by Trump no matter how toxic the scandal, found herself locked in a showdown with Bonino over how to handle the files. And Bonino? He wasn't exactly subtle about airing the dirty laundry. The man posted on X, formerly Twitter, a cryptic message that said, "What I've learned during our proper and necessary investigation into the aforementioned matters," which shocked me to the core. Because of this, we are unable to manage a republic. Now, that post wasn't just vague, it was practically served with a side of betrayal. It hinted at something uglier lurking beneath the surface, and let's just say, Bondi wasn't thrilled about it.
He is the kind of person that is a grifter, and he is an evangelical preacher to people who believed that Celebrity Apprentice was true. And humiliated and embarrassed, he has no control, and he goes apeshit. Can I say that?
Yeah, you just did.
Mark Burnett owns the cache of all of Trump's sickness, and he refuses to release it.
So what did Bonino do? Did he jump to defend the administration? Not even close. He leaned into his media stardom and essentially positioned himself as a tragic hero. He wasn't just another cog in the MAGA machine. He was a lone wolf, an outsider exposing corruption while trying to survive in a den of snakes. It would have been Oscar-worthy if it weren't so blatantly self-serving. People close to him said his motivations had less to do with exposing the truth and more to do with keeping his empire alive. After all, no one buys a book from a guy they think is also corrupt. For Bonino, this wasn't about justice. It was about staying marketable. The fallout was hard to ignore. What once looked like a tightly knit MAGA movement now resembled a group of reality TV contestants clawing for screen time. The unity Trump loved to boast about was fracturing into factions, those still kissing the ring and those trying to escape before the entire ship went under. Bonino's social media post wasn't just a warning shot. It felt like a slap in the face to anyone still pretending the cracks weren't there. And yet, the mess didn't end here. If anything, it spiraled even further when Ghislaine Maxwell entered the scene. Because, believe it or not, another controversial meeting was still to come, one that dug the knife even deeper into the MAGA movement's trust issues.
I have to say that I was expecting him to do something as absurd as he did, for a few reasons. Number one, I read Project 2025. Number two, I've had 20 years of abuse from him, so I knew it wasn't going to stop. When I got a message from my friend Victor, who said, "Did you hear about it?" I'm like, "About what?" He's like, "Did you see it?" I'm like, "Don't know what you're talking about." And I was watching tennis, I believe it was Saturday. And what's going on in the White House and in our government and in the streets of LA and all over the country with these ICE roundups.
Trump's world wasn't just falling apart, it was imploding in slow motion, with more betrayals and scandals on the way. What happens when Ghislaine Maxwell, a disgraced socialite sitting in prison for sex trafficking minors, ends up in a room with a highly placed government lawyer closely tied to Trump's administration? You get a spectacle that feels less like justice and more like the plot of a scandal-soaked legal soap opera. Todd Blanche, Trump's assistant attorney general, made the highly questionable decision to interview Maxwell during a time when the Epstein files were already lighting up headlines. And instead of it bringing clarity, it created an uproar, with people accusing the administration of bending the rules to shield Trump from whatever might come out of Epstein's sticky web. And if you think it couldn't look worse, let's add some personal ties to the mix. Todd Blanche wasn't just some random prosecutor. He had a particularly snug relationship with Maxwell's lawyer, David Marcus. These two weren't just professional acquaintances. They acted more like members of an elite legal members-only club. Their public exchanges, filled with mutual compliments on podcasts and at conferences, sounded less like lawyer talk and more like a buddy-buddy routine. To the average viewer, this wasn't inspiring confidence. It was confirming their worst fears. With friendships like that, how impartial could this interview really be? You've got the prosecutor and the defense attorney practically sharing playlists, and we're supposed to believe there's fairness in play. The backlash, as you'd expect, was swift and unforgiving. The entire scenario started feeling like one of those scripted courtroom dramas where the judge and defendant keep sneaking smiles at each other. The so-called justice system wasn't just under a microscope, it was getting ripped apart on social media. People were asking why a convicted felon like Maxwell, implicated in one of the most despicable crimes imaginable, was being treated with such special attention. It was like watching someone who had just robbed a bank being invited to tea with the detectives investigating the case. And of course, the question hanging in the air was simple. Why Maxwell? Why now? Every angle of the interview screamed optics disaster. Or maybe that's being too kind. Some argued that it wasn't just about bad looks, but about a deliberate move to influence testimony. Was this administration planning to offer Maxwell some kind of deal? Whispered promises of leniency, or even hints at a pardon circled like vultures? What made all this even more outrageous was the context. The Epstein files had thrust deeply uncomfortable truths into the public eye. Wealthy, powerful figures were being connected to one of the most grotesque illegal operations anyone could remember. For Trump, whose name had already been whispered in Epstein-adjacent circles, it was imperative to distance himself completely. But this interview with Maxwell, it didn't cast distance. It screamed desperation. Instead of clearing things up, it drove home the impression that some very sketchy strings were being pulled behind closed doors. Blanche's involvement didn't help. Someone in his His position is supposed to represent the highest ethical standards, yet his cozy ties to Maxwell's legal defense raised eyebrows, and not in a way that inspired confidence. It stunk of backroom deals, of favors being traded within that exclusive legal elite that always seems to land on its feet. The public wasn't just skeptical anymore, they were openly angry. But the real punchline? For all the deflection attempts, this scandal didn't quiet the critics, it emboldened them. If anything, it gave even Trump's staunchest supporters a reason to pause. Was this the man they'd rallied behind as a fighter against corruption? Or was this just another example of Trump painting outside the legal lines when it worked to his favor? The truth became clear to many. This wasn't just another PR misfire. The Maxwell interview was a window into Trump's willingness to treat the justice system like a plaything, and the cracks in the MAGA armor, already worrisome, were starting to look like straight-up fault lines. Trump's empire has always been built on a foundation as sturdy as a Jenga tower in a windstorm. Ego, grudges, and power plays stacked precariously high. The tantrums, scandals, and betrayals we've unraveled don't just expose a pattern, they reveal how fragile the entire structure truly is. With the Epstein files exposing hypocrisies and allies like Dan Benino jumping ship, the MAGA movement looks less like a force and more like a house divided. So here's the real question: will America let one man's ego keep bending the rules? Or is accountability finally catching up with the orange turd? We'll see.